Welcome, Travis Brown. We have you in-house today.
So happy to be here.
So I'm excited to get you and force you into my podcast room.
It's an amazing room too, by the way. So.
I know, it's pretty nice, right?
Cool.
We like it. Yeah. So I wanted to bring you in to talk today about, when we have our initial conversations with clients and they're talking to us about their sales challenges. They want someone to come and lead their sales team, and they haven't really gotten used to the idea of a CRO.
Yep.
So when we have those conversations saying like, our sales teams don't have enough leads, or, they don't know how to outbound, or, that kind of thing. I want to talk about the difference between a VP of sales and what a CRO does.
Depending on the life cycle of the business, where they're at, and I would say specifically from a revenue standpoint, that's when you want to start considering either a sales leader, a CRO, or bringing in somebody to even support with sales in some capacity. What I typically see is between like 0 and call it 2 to 4 million is where most of the companies or even agencies are looking for product market fit. And once they cross over to that threshold is when they start to look for support. Now, that being said, I've heard of a lot of companies at a younger stage who just hate doing sales, wanting to bring somebody in earlier to support, whether it's a director, a VP, or a CRO. Even I would advise against that, primarily because I think at that early stage, founder-led sales is critical. I think the founders themselves should be in the room, hearing the challenges from the clients, hearing the pushback, why someone's saying yes, no, and getting all of that information firsthand. Once you cross into that, like, let's just call it 2 to 4 million range, you can start looking for support. And depending on the needs of your business, if you need somebody very senior and strategic, you may want to look for a CRO. Typically, the difference between a VP of sales, director of sales, even CRO, is that I would see a director or VP of sales, even on a full-time or a fractional basis, stepping into a sales role. So whether they're managing people or managing the sales team or doing the sales themselves, that's what you want in that position, is somebody who can tactically get in there and close deals with a client. A lot of people bring a CRO in to do that. I would argue that once you step into a CRO role, it's much higher level and more strategic. You're stepping out of that deal. And that's where a lot of problems, I see a lot of people get promoted from VP of sales to CRO.
Right.
And they can't step away from being the tactical seller. They love that part of it. And it was one of the things I had to do. I had to step out of being in the room a lot and like closing deals, which I love doing, to work on the strategy, aligning the team, working with your first team, your C-suite, right? Your CFO, your CPO, your CEO, to put a long-term strategy and vision in place. So I would say it's primarily strategic versus closing sales. And if you need somebody to close sales, you want to look at a VP over a CRO.
So when you say strategic, some may say, well, don't you want to strategically go after certain clients, or do you want to strategically get on a cold call? Like, what do you mean when you say strategic leadership versus actually doing the job?
Yep, and that's fair. And so I would think a VP of sales is thinking about strategy solely from a client perspective. Who can we close? Putting those lists together, going out and finding those lists, figuring out the lead gen behind that, how to bring in inbound, outbound channels to make sure they're getting leads for the team, and then going to close those deals. When I think of a CRO, I think much more about strategy for the business itself. So how do you bring in all the parts? The CRO is going to give feedback to the CPO, right? How do we get the feedback about helping them with product? How do we work with finance too, about using our finances to generate leads and bringing in a team? On the marketing side, sometimes the CRO manages marketing, that'll report up to them. Right. Sometimes there's still a CMO or somebody doing that. How do you work with them to bring in and generate a robust pipeline? But that's what you work on more than actually the specifics of closing the client or bringing in the client. And so I spend most of my time with our clients as a CRO working on strategy, thinking about what's going on 6 months from now, 5 years from now, and how to work against those goals. So,
right. So as a fractional CMO, I love working with CROs because they're a little bit more marketing minded versus kind of being in their siloed sales department. And it's kind of like marketing versus sales, and it's not always very cohesive. And so that's always a goal too, right? So in terms of like ROI, how do you look at initiatives as a CRO in terms of ROI?
Yeah, and I think back to when I was a VP, and I don't even think I thought about ROI. It was like we did everything we could to bring in revenue, and that was the key component, right? It was sales, sales, sales. So I looked at what the team was doing and where they were spending their time, but my end goal was to bring in the specific revenue target. If we hit that, I was good, right? I didn't think how much we spent on marketing. Yeah. I didn't think about where those dollars were going. I didn't think about margin as much, right? So if there was almost no margin, and in most of the products I've worked for, they've been tech, or tech focused or advertising focused. So there was a good margin, but I didn't focus on that. And so it's a really good question. As you step into a more senior role, you do think about the investment and where those dollars are going. Now, That being said, I hope VPs at any level, especially at earlier stage startups, are thinking about that because you have a limited budget. And so how are you going to spend that as a VP? You may get the responsibility to bring in the dollars from and use marketing to do so. And so you do have to think about ROI, but it's a very different conversation, I would say, between those two.
Yeah,
positions.
absolutely. And like small companies and big companies, right? It's like we have a limited budget, or we're like, okay, we're ready to scale. We're ready to grow really big. We also need to look at, what those dollars are going to. And not all marketing teams do that. Not all sales teams do that, right?
Well, in ROI today, too, it's an interesting one. I hear a lot of people who want to see from marketing and from sales, if I spend $1, I get $5 back. And I don't think ROI is the right metric all of the time to be measuring against, the return that you're actually getting. So there's a bunch of fantastic campaigns that are out there that you probably can't attribute sales dollars to, revenue dollars to, but they're effectively pushing the brand. You're getting notoriety and awareness. So ROI is an interesting one too. And a lot of people, CMOs and CROs, are being held accountable to that exact number.
Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of articles lately, CMOs getting in trouble. And it's like, well, we have to do some brand stuff. Yeah, that's hard to track, but that's a whole other conversation. But do you have any final advice for CEOs, founders who are looking to hire a VP of sales or navigate fractional CROs or a CRO?
Yeah, if you have questions, first reach out to us. Honestly, even if we spend a half hour asking you questions about your business, you may understand a little bit better about what you're looking for, but understand where you're at in your life cycle, understand exactly what you need, and write down that job description. If you need strategic support, if you need a right hand for somebody to teach you about marketing, to help you take it to the next level, to understand revenue holistically, I would say you may want a C-suite CRO or CMO. But ask those questions. If sales are going incredibly well, and you need somebody to step in and do some process, but really just continue to drive those sales, you may want a fractional VP of sales or a full-time VP of sales as well. If you just hate doing sales, I'd say to most CEOs and founders that I meet, learn to love it. It is one of the most important things forever that we will work on, and you're always going to be selling the company or selling the product. But if you do want to pass that on, think about what you tactically need. You just need somebody to come in, work 8 hours a day on selling, then you probably don't need somebody so strategic, and you can hire a VP or a director.
Great.
Cool. Thanks for having me.